Hi, and welcome to the Curb installation video. Today we're going to be showing you how to install the Curb M10 unit, which is this unit right here. M10 in the name stands for M, which is mobile, means that it has a cellular communication, and 10 in the name stands for having 10 sensors or CT clamps to measure individual breakers inside the electrical panel. The Curb system gets installed in 5 easy steps. The first step is to mount the Curb on the wall. The second step is to power the Curb device. The third step is to install the Curb sensors. The fourth step is to configure the Curb. And the fifth step is to hand off the Curb account to the end customer. Let's get started by getting familiar with the different components that are included in the Curb system. The first part is the Curb M10 device, which is this blue device inside of this enclosure. The second thing to see is the CT clamp sensors. There are 10 total CT clamp sensors, 2 different sizes. First, the large 100 amp CT clamps. There's 2 of those. And then there are 8 smaller 30 amp CT clamps. Now, the Curb device gets power from 4 individual wires. Here we have a wire for line 1, line 2, a neutral, and a ground. Those all go into the connector block, which then gets plugged into the Curb device. Curb is powered by a separate 20 amp breaker that is installed inside the home's electrical panel. In addition to the Curb device components, there's a handful of useful mounting devices. We recommend including 1-inch pipe fittings of various lengths, a close, a 1-inch, a 3-inch, an offset, and even a 6-inch. We also recommend having conduit, a right angle, number 12 wire, and a 20 amp breaker to power the Curb device. Also, think about how you're going to be mounting the Curb box and the right type of drywall anchors or brick anchors that you would use for installing the Curb device. We also recommend a handful of useful tools. 1, a multimeter. 2 would be a 1 3/8 hole saw, a wire stripper, a power drill, a flathead screwdriver, and a level. All right, let's start with step 1, which is mounting the Curb. The Curb system should be installed at least 6 inches away from any metal panels. It should also be installed at least 3 feet away from the ground. This allows the communication signals to not be blocked by anything around it. The Curb system gets installed in 3 easy steps. First, utilize any knockouts in the existing panel to identify holes, or use the hole saw to add an additional hole to the electrical panel. The second step is to run the conduit across from the Curb device into the electrical panel. And then the third step is simply mounting the Curb device on the wall. And ensure to use a level to make sure it's level. Step 2 of installing the Curb device is getting power to the Curb device. Before you start this one, make sure that you turn off the main power from the electrical panel so that there's no power flowing into the system. The Curb is powered by a new 20 amp 2-pole breaker. As you can see, we've installed a new 20 amp breaker right here that powers the Curb device. The Curb needs to be connected through 4 individual wires. There's a wire for line 1, line 2, a neutral, and a ground. All of these wires come from the electrical panel, then get routed through the conduit and get connected into the power block connector, where they simply snap in to these orange ports and to the corresponding labels in this connector. This connector then gets installed into the bottom of the Curb device and powers the Curb device. Step 3 for installing the Curb device is installing the CT clamps or sensors on the individual wires inside the electrical panel, and then feeding these wires through the conduit and into the Curb device itself. There are 2 100 amp CT clamps. Those will go on the main power for the home, line 1 and line 2. There are 8 smaller 30 amp CT clamps that can go on the individual branch circuits, like solar, air conditioner, pool pumps, hot water heaters, and even sub panels. When you're installing the Curb 100 amp CT clamps, you're going to want to verify that they're being installed on the right lines for the electrical panel so that they correspond with the same inputs or phase that you're powering the Curb device. That means that for this red wire, we're trying to verify that it's the same voltage or same phase as the input that is the red wire that goes into the Curb device. To verify that it's the same phase, you want to use your multimeter to verify that the voltage difference between the two is 0. If you see that the voltage is 240, then you'll know that the voltages are swapped or you're on the opposite phase. You're going to want to install the other 8 CT clamps that are the small 30 amp CT clamps on the electrical panel branch circuits. You should follow our priority list of circuits to monitor. Typically, the highest priority is solar, an air conditioner, an air handler, a pool pump, or an electric vehicle. There are a handful of other priority circuits that you can reference later in this video. The way that you're going to install that is simply snap the sensor around the individual branch circuit and run the wire through the conduit and into the individual ports on the Curb device at the top here. Step 4 of installing the Curb M10 unit is configuring the device. Configure the device using the Curb Installer app, which is a different app than the existing Curb app on the different Play stores and Apple stores. The first step of configuring that Curb device involves signing in with your installer credentials. Step 2 would be scanning for the Curb M10 that is local to you, and you're able to identify it by the individual serial number. The serial number for the Curb device is listed inside the cover on the individual device, and you can match it up with the serial number that's presented in the installer app. Once you've identified the individual Curb serial number, you're able to go to the configuration page. The configuration page will allow you to rename each of the individual inputs from the mains, solar, air conditioner, air handler, etc. This also allows you to configure the mains and allows you to invert the mains so that they are measuring the right direction. It allows you to invert the solar so that it is also going the right direction. It allows you to double power consumption readings for 2-pole breakers. Most 2-pole breakers are a balanced load, which means that you can double the power consumption of an air conditioner to get both legs of that power consumption. The next step in configuring the Curb device is identifying the location. Simply put in the address where the Curb is installed. The next step of getting the Curb configured is getting it connected to the customer's Wi-Fi. Scan for Wi-Fi on site and then put in the customer's password. It's worth noting that Curb only works on 2.4G systems. It will not work with a 5G system. This is very common for most smart home devices. The last step is sending the welcome email to the customer. Simply input the customer's email address and the Curb will send them a welcome email. They'll create their account and be able to log in and see the power consumption of all their major devices immediately. The last step of installing the Curb M10 is simply inputting the customer's email address on the last step of the configuration app. This will send a welcome email to the customer who will then be able to create an account and log into their Curb system. To wrap up, simply replace the cover on the Curb system, restore power to the home, to turn power on to the Curb device. Also, make sure to label the breaker that powers the Curb system as Curb so that the customer is able to power cycle it if there's any problems in the future. All right, let's get familiar with the Curb device itself. Along here, we have 10 inputs for the CT clamps. You want to input both the red and the black wire of the CT clamp and depress the two inputs of the individual connector to slide them in. It's worth always verifying with a little tug on each of those individual inputs. Below that, we have the power input. The power input has an input for line 1, line 2 of the electrical, also neutral and ground. There are a handful of very helpful lights on the Curb device that help you tell you the status of the system. First, this top component here is the cellular connection. And because it is green here under status means that it is connected to cellular. The next light here is the Wi-Fi light. This light tells you the status. In this example, it's red, showing that it is not connected to Wi-Fi yet. You also see another light that is blue here that's labeled mode. That is our Bluetooth light, and that shows that Bluetooth is currently on and communicating. The button next to the status or Wi-Fi button is a boot or reboot or reset button. You can click that once to reset the Curb device, or hold it down for 10 seconds and it will do a full factory reboot. It's worth noting there are two different antenna systems on the Curb device. This is the cellular connection that goes to the cellular antenna, and this is the Wi-Fi connection. We want to ensure that both those antennas are at least 6 inches away from any metal boxes, and also that they are at least 3 feet away from the floor.